Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Working Remotely. Today, we are talking to Emily Sloan Pace, our professor in residence for Zoho. Welcome to Working Remotely, Emily.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
It's a pleasure talking to you, Emily. Emily, the first thing that comes to my mind is you had joined us like 5 years ago, and you were one of the
Mhm.
first chief editors we had in the company. You were like the communication specialist, and you were starting
Yeah.
this whole process like from the ground up. And you were doing it not just working remotely, but from working like oceans away to like 7,000 of us here who are culturally different from you. And then there is a time difference in play. And then this whole thing has to be set up from the ground up. Tell us your experience
Mhm.
of it, Emily.
Well, it was a really interesting challenge and it was a really great experience. We decided that we really needed some consistency in our communication to customers and
Mm-hmm.
also in our internal communication.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so we made the decision to kind of start small.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started with me. And yeah, it was really interesting first getting to meet all of my colleagues
Mm-hmm.
basically online
Mm-hmm.
before the first time I traveled to India to
Mm-hmm.
meet many of them face to face.
Mm-hmm.
And so things like click, like
Mm-hmm.
being able to chat with people just instantly
Mm-hmm.
became really imperative to
Mm-hmm.
just building relationships,
Mm-hmm.
especially in those early years. And then, it's the way that I just continue to keep in touch with so many of my colleagues as I work remotely. In an even larger sense, in that I don't work in the office anymore. So for about the first 4 years,
Mm-hmm.
I worked in an office, and we built up a team of local editors based in the California Bay Area and in
Mm-hmm.
Austin, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
So even in that team,
Mm-hmm.
we from the get go worked in separate locations,
Mm-hmm.
and we collaborated together with
Mm-hmm.
our many, many colleagues in
Mm-hmm.
India.
Mm-hmm.
And so, initially for me, I came from an academic background.
Mm-hmm.
And so coming into tech was a big change.
Yeah.
I had never been to Asia before.
Right.
And so traveling to India for the first time was really interesting. And oh my gosh, it is very, very hot there. And the first time I went to India was at the very end of May, which is almost always the hottest week of the year.
Yeah, we are warm
So
people, I
it was
tell you.
quite the shock to get off the plane that first time. I travel at better times now. Um, but yeah, really figuring out how to communicate with people through chat
Uh-huh.
or through written communication,
Right.
because 5 years ago, even the video connections were not as good as
Yeah.
they were now. And so,
Right.
so much of the conversation
Right.
happened through these kind of online collaborative
Mm-hmm.
work
Mm-hmm.
tools that we
Mm-hmm.
had. A cool thing that I learned around collaborating with people, especially in a cross-cultural context,
Mm-hmm.
is that pleasantries are an absolute must.
Okay.
Unless it's a person that you are talking to like every single hour, then maybe you don't have to ask, hello, how are you every time. But for people that you talk to once a week, once a month, every 6 months,
Right.
oh, wow, really important to start off
Can't
with those
disagree.
like human interactions that you would have face to face
Right.
that get so easily kind of swept aside when we're in a rush and we're just typing.
True.
So that was the thing I learned really quickly, was that I have to do the same sort of social engagement with people when I'm talking to them through a medium like chat as I do face to face, if
Mm-hmm.
not even more so
Right.
than I do in face to face. So
Right, right, beautiful. I think that is a really big challenge because you're literally shaking hands with the person for the first time, like you're introducing yourself, and you're going to help them edit their document, which is like writers consider their writings to be very sensitive and very personal. So you're going to intervene and help them do that, which means you're going to make some changes to it too. So to do the
yeah,
handshake and to get that job done, communication skills, that is the next thing that I was going to talk to you about. We've been having a lot of discussion with all my previous guests about, it's okay to err on the line of over communication instead of communicating
Mhm.
lesser. But I think what is really, really essential is to communicate clearly and sincerely than to even talk about over communication or less communication.
Absolutely.
When you came to Zoho, I think one of the first things that you were talking to us were about rhetorics and empathy. These two things were one
Mhm.
of your repeated topic of discussion. So please tell us about the importance of such a clarity in communication with that is delivered with sincerity.
Sure. I think that clear communication and responsiveness is really sort of the ultimate act of empathy
Mm-hmm.
in business relationships.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, because it's really you going out of your way to think about what the audience that you're talking to needs to hear,
Mm-hmm.
um, what kind of information that
Mm-hmm.
they're seeking,
Mm-hmm.
and the kind of voice or attitude, the kind of reassurance or confidence that you need to project in
Right.
order to engage with them.
Mm-hmm.
I think fundamentally, and I know we all get so flooded with emails and with chat requests, I think it is so essential to respond.
Mm-hmm.
And just giving that response too is so important. Even if that response is a no,
Mm-hmm.
um, letting someone know that you've received their message
Mm-hmm.
and that you are answering it is so vital
Mm-hmm.
for the kind of digital communication
Mm-hmm.
that so much of us engage with because we're not usually able to read someone's body language through that email or that chat that they
Right.
send.
Right.
And so I really spend a lot of time thinking about, how can we make this message, this error message, say
Mm-hmm.
clearer, or
Mm-hmm.
how can we help to kind of improve the language on this button inside the user interface
Mm-hmm.
so that it's so that any customer, regardless of whether or not they're like a really high tech individual or
Mm-hmm.
someone who kind of needs some more hand holding,
Right.
feels comfortable about engaging with that screen
Interface.
that they're
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of, I think one of the great things I learned in teaching
Mm-hmm.
was that word choice really, really matters, and especially when you're engaging with someone via text message
Mm-hmm.
or via chat or email, kind of exclusively.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, really easy to type something out that sounds totally fine in your brain,
Mm-hmm.
but is like, oh, wow, that is super offensive to me, or that seems like you're being really short or angry with me. And so I really try to think about my audience, like who it is that I am trying to speak to.
Mm-hmm.
And that is all about kind of putting myself into their shoes and really trying to be empathetic. A lot of the work that I do now is in kind of a customer support, customer advocacy role.
Right.
And so I often deal with people that feel very frustrated and are maybe not
Mm-hmm.
in a great place to
Yeah.
communicate the challenges that they're facing or are struggling with the technology in a way that they don't know how to explain.
Right.
And so I find that that's just a really great opportunity to empathize with them, to
Mm-hmm.
let them know that I'm also not necessarily a technologist, but that my goal is to understand what they're saying and to be able to clearly articulate that to others and hopefully come to a resolution.
Beautiful. So you worked with us and you helped us understand this importance of communication, and you are now taking this to the customers as well to help them, to help both of us have a good communication going on. That is beautiful
Yeah.
and really. And one more thing is, I think considering the time difference in play, every day when you wake up, you should be having tons of chat messages in your laptop. And then you're also
Mm-hmm.
an editor, which is like a job that needs keen focus for you to work on, like in a way that you can't be like chatting with somebody and then also simultaneously work on the document. How did you manage to
Sure.
like sort of put a segregation to these two things?
Well, I definitely really learned early on that I needed to kind of set a time,
Mm-hmm.
especially when I moved out of the office so that I was really remotely working, that
Mm-hmm.
I kind of had to set a schedule
Mm-hmm.
around when I would no longer take calls or do conversations. And I try to really adhere to that schedule. I'm not necessarily always great about it because sometimes other things get in the way.
Mm-hmm.
A big change for me that came when I started working remotely is the recognition that kind of the job was no longer 9 to 5,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that brings a lot of great flexibility because it meant that I could do things during the day that maybe it wasn't so easy to do when I was going into the office. It
Mm-hmm.
also means that maybe I work different hours. You know, sometimes I work later, sometimes I work earlier or on weekends. So it's a trade-off that I really I value the flexibility. In
Mm-hmm.
terms of the time zone, my gosh, never in my life would I have imagined that the question I ask myself most every day is, what time is it in India? So
Oh.
I'm pretty good now at thinking about, when we spoke earlier in my day,
Uh-huh.
late last night for
Right.
you,
Uh-huh.
I try to stay really keenly aware of what time zone my colleagues are in. And whatever time zone I'm in, they are in essentially the exact opposite. So I really do my best to try to wish them good night when they're talking to me at 2 in the morning. I try to encourage them to go to sleep.
Right.
And I think that kind of situational awareness,
Right.
in terms of being aware of where in the world and in the time zone that person is that you're speaking to, but also being aware of kind of the language that they're going to use. So in some ways I had to learn how to kind of that speaking to an engineer is really different than speaking to a marketer. And so I had to appreciate that those were going to take really different communication styles.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to kind of learn the language
Mm-hmm.
and figure out when it was right to use which words.
Oh, okay, that is interesting. Would you like to tell us a bit about that when you talk to our engineering teams? How exactly is it different when you work with marketers or content creators?
Oh, I think, I mean, an engineer, I would say I'm definitely a humanities person. And I
Mm-hmm.
would say that engineers often have kind of a different mindset when
Mm-hmm.
approaching problems
Mm-hmm.
than humanities people do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the group has their own jargon, their own sort
Uh-huh.
of language with their shorthand. And so I had to learn a whole bunch of jargon. And that was actually the first couple months that I was working at Zoho. I was Googling every acronym because I had no idea I think I knew what like ROI was. I had some sense
Right.
of what return on investment was
Right.
as like a vague concept. But
Uh-huh.
then terms like KPI or performance indicator or DRI, directly responsible individual, or PM, like learning how to differentiate when it's a product manager versus the product marketer, all around the context in the email. It just creates it's always about kind of just threading these different languages when you're working with people that, I mean, to me, engineering, programming, that is a totally different language. It has its own grammar and it has its own thought process. I
Mm-hmm.
don't understand it. Like I understand mine. That one is like magic to me.
Beautiful,
So
beautiful, Emily. You talked about the sensitivity that we have. I mean, time sensitivity we have to be aware of, the pleasantries that we should have in mind, and the designation of the people that we are talking to, whether it's an engineer or whether it is a content creator. So many things. These are
and
such good tips, I think. But that takes me to my another topic of discussion, which is loneliness. That if you look at it in the social media, there is a lot of topic about loneliness that surround this whole remote work side of things. And I was having this discussion with Mira also the other day, who was my previous guest, and Mira made this really interesting point that if you love your company, you won't really feel that lonely, even when you're working remotely,
sure.
which is really true, and I completely agree. But then again, not every situation is that ideal, and we all kind of feel like sometimes we're left out, sometimes we're misunderstood, and with the
Mhm.
teams that we are working in, and then that team alone becomes a representation of our company in the big picture. So have you
Mhm.
ever, I mean, do you relate to what I'm talking about? If so, what would be that one thing that you want to tell people who are feeling that way?
So I know Mira very well, and the entire time that I've known Mira, she has been working remotely
Mm-hmm.
out of a different office location in India than where our headquarters are. And
Right.
I have also been, working remotely from where what I like to call the mothership is located in Chennai. I mean, everyone is kind of that's the like hub, and
Uh,
everyone else is on the spokes.
right.
And so, uh, I think loneliness can be a real challenge.
Mm-hmm.
I find that I use, the digital communication tools that are
Mm-hmm.
available to me
Mm-hmm.
constantly. And
Mm-hmm.
that's things like our company social media connect. Like
Mm-hmm.
I really spend a lot of time, especially when I started at the company, because I had never been to India and I didn't know anyone. Being able to get on to our internal social media and like look at pictures of people and be like, oh, okay, that's this person, and they, based on this, they sort of do this. That
Right.
was so useful to me, so that like sometimes when I
Right.
would walk in to meet someone, I actually knew who I was talking to.
Right.
Um, and things like communicating through click through, various
Mm-hmm.
chat channels,
Mm-hmm.
through things like meeting. So I make use of the digital channels that are available to me like constantly.
Right.
And
Right.
so aside from things like our company social media
Mm-hmm.
and things like chat, I love the way that I can really easily tag people on emails. So other people don't necessarily need to see everything, but I can just like tag them on specific things without having to forward the thread.
Right. Right.
That sort of gives me a whole bunch of opportunities for engagement in different ways. And so I
Yeah.
really value that. A number of our products have these
Right.
comment
Right.
features, but
Right.
in Writer, I particularly love um, two things. One, the ability to leave comments. And so I can really engage and I can tag writers so I can bring people right into a document so they
Right.
don't have to search through things,
Uh-huh.
because that is incredibly essential when
Uh-huh.
you're looking through like hundreds of documents or reviewing stuff. Like being able to point right to where someone needs to go
Right.
is really helpful.
Yeah.
But also you can choose the color that you edit
Mm-hmm.
in Writer. And
Mm-hmm.
so you can pick colors that suit your personality. And so I really love purple. And so I always choose purple. And it makes me really happy that I can put a little bit of like my personality,
Mm-hmm.
in that color choice.
Mm-hmm.
So
Beautiful. So you basically created a virtual network for yourself with all of us back in India, and you made use of all the tools that we had to get in touch with us, to be connected with us.
absolutely. I feel just so grateful to have tools like that that give me the pulse
Mm-hmm.
of the company
Mm-hmm.
without me having to be there.
Right, beautiful. I think it would be unfair if I did not talk about Shakespeare with you because you did a PhD on Shakespeare. I didn't even know such a thing was possible before I got to know you. And you have been able to connect Shakespeare through all aspects of a SaaS company, right from design to product management to writing and to now even customer success, I believe. What would
Mhm.
Shakespeare have to say about remote working, Emily?
Well, I think Shakespeare knew a lot about remote work, in part because in the times that he lived in, they would get quarantined because of the plague. And
Oh,
so he had to live with just everything being shut down, and you got to stay at home,
hmm,
basically. And in one famous time, when he was quarantined, he wrote most of King Lear, one of his most famous plays. Um, I was thinking today about kind of Shakespeare and what would Shakespeare say about all the kind of the isolation
mm-hmm,
maybe that some of us experience now as we're doing this remote work,
uh-huh,
or that we just experience in our lives.
Uh-huh.
And I stumbled across this little factoid that, I had forgotten, but Shakespeare is the person who coined the word lonely. And so
Whoa.
I think he would have understood, having lived through quarantine, but also having been really productive during quarantine, but
Yeah.
also coming up with the word lonely. I think he would have gotten the challenges that we were facing today in figuring out how to be connected with people in new ways, because that was the same thing that was happening to him with the printing press and with the growing navigation and trade that was happening. And, just the fact that the world was growing much, much larger and much, much smaller all the time,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is the exact same thing that is happening for us.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Emily. We learned such interesting,
Absolutely.
cool, great things from you, and it was so nice talking to you. Hopefully, I will see you again.
Absolutely. As soon as the planes are flying, I'm sure we'll be back up in the air.
Thank you so much for your time, Emily.
Have a good night.
Bye bye.